Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, you can close off, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Frank Cho. Frank Cho is an assistant professor of accounting at the Wharton School, the University of Pennsylvania. His research focused on firm voluntary disclosure and financial reporting practice and their economic impacts. Frank serves on the editorial board for the Accounting Review and Accounting Horizon and has published research in top-ranking journals in accounting and finance, including Management Science, Journal of Accounting Research, Journal of Financial Economics, Review of Accounting Studies, Journal of Accounting and Economics, and the Accounting Review. He holds a PhD in accounting and an MBA from the University of Chicago and master degree in finance from Tilburg University, Netherlands. Now we will start our seminar with dear Frank Cho.
All right, so thank you very much for the introduction, and then thank you for inviting me to present in this very well-known webinar series. So today, the paper I'm presenting is estimating the value of auditing services for private firms. And this paper is co-authored with Edward Chanel from WashU, Lisa Liu from Columbia University, and Li Jing Tong from Beijing Jiaotong University. And as Mohammed introduced, I'm Frank from the Wharton School, UPenn. Everyone is welcome to ask questions anytime or interrupt me anytime. So I'm happy to explain what we do. So without further ado, so let me start a presentation. So we know that audits are mandated by regulators for public firms. They are very important for financial reporting process, which provides assurance and increased reliability of a company's financial statements. The implication of audit mandate is that public companies cannot review their preference for audit because it's a mandate. So in this paper, we look at private firms, private companies, and their voluntary audits. So here, private companies not really mandated to provide audited financial statements. They can choose to undergo audits voluntarily. So these voluntary decisions would be able to provide information about firms' preference for audit. So basically, given this background, the goal of this paper is to understand the net value of auditing in a voluntary regime. And so this value in the private firm context is less evident because private firms in particular often rely on relationship financing, which depends on soft information and also internal cash. To give you an example, in our sample, about 27% of private firms produce audited financial statements, and our sample is coming from Chinese firms between 2013 and 2018. So this means the vast majority of private firms in our sample, don't really have audited financial statements. And to give you a comparison, in Menace 2011, he finds that 23% of US firms between 2001 and 2007 have produced audited financial statements. The rest of the firms don't really have audited financial statements. However, prior research also documents tremendous amount of benefits of financial statement verification for private firms. For example, lower interest rates, in particular when firms seek external debt financing. So basically, the extent to which audits are valuable to private clients remains unclear, particularly when debt financing is not an immediate concern. But even when firms seek external financing from banks, the channels through which audits affect debt financing are also unclear. For example, we know that audits could increase financial reporting quality, which reduce information asymmetry and lowers cost of financing. While they could also improve external monitoring, which could reduce moral hazard concerns such as managers' empire building incentives. Or, some research also find that, the decision to hire an audit firm could also signal superior borrower quality because only the good borrowers are able to afford an audit. So then these could allow firms to signal their type, which in turn could increase capital raising. So it's hard to really distinguish which mechanism drives the observed relationship between audit and direct financing, and this is something this paper would try to separate. So the way we do it is that we are going to use a dynamic model in which the model would incorporate both forward-looking decisions of clients and audit firms within an oligopolistic audit market. So which means the audit firm compete with each other for clients, and they are forward-looking about both the client decisions as well as their future profits, and clients are forward-looking about both the fees and the quality offers by the incumbent and competing audit firms, as well as their future economic benefits from choosing an audit firm and raising debt. So we're going to do this using structural estimation, because based on the nutshell of the model, the dynamic model we are going to build or estimate, is really difficult to incorporate all these elements within a reduced form approach or linear regression. So we're going to use the model to recover latent constructs, such as the net value of audit services and differentiated audit quality. And eventually, we're going to conduct several counterfactual analysis to simulate how clients would choose audit firms and raise debt under different regulatory and market regimes. And we hope that these analysis could inform policymakers. All right, so before I go into the details, so first I want to explain why were we doing this. And this is a quote from a structural estimation summer school taught by Tony Whited from University of Michigan. So she basically said structural estimation imposes large costs on the reader, so any structural paper must put great effort into convincing reader that it's worth going structural. And so why do we do this? As mentioned, in our setting, so we are thinking about clients' decisions being dynamic, which means that clients may anticipate the usefulness of audits for expanding debt in the future, despite that audits add very little value themselves today. So because it's dynamic thinking, such a dynamic thinking is more easily captured using a structural approach. In addition, auditor decisions are also dynamic. So the well-known result is the so-called low-balling result. So because client auditor choices are persistent, which is observed in our data as well as in prior research examining public firms' audit choices. So because of this persistence, winning client today can lead to greater future audit revenue. So that would incentivize audit firms to make different offers about their fees and quality relative to the situation in which clients' auditor choices are not persistent. So the dynamics of these decisions are more easily captured by a structural model. And in addition, it's also well known that auditors compete for clients. So with this competition, the quality of the audit services is the endogenous to competition, and it's very difficult to control for such competitive effect. And in many cases, competition among the audit firm is actually of interest to researchers. So we're going to directly specify oligopolistic competition among the audit firms. And also another kind of common problem that applies to many audit papers is that only winning auditor's fees is observed. However, when clients make choices, oftentimes they're thinking about the potential, if they potentially switch to another audit firm, or if they are newly to the audit market, as is the case for many of the private firms in our data. So then they have to think about what are the potential fees other audit firms may offer, and then they choose, the best fee quality trade-off. So, and so which means that, in the data, if we only observe the winning audit firm's fees, then there are missing data problems regarding the fees of the audit firms that were not chosen by the client eventually. And also, the audit quality of all audit firms are unobservable. So our approach, a structural model, can estimate both the unobserved audit quality as well as the unobserved audit fees for the audit firms that are not chosen by the client. So the setting of our paper, as I alluded to earlier, is private firms in China who which choose audit firms or choose to audit financial statement voluntarily. And so during our sample period, private firms voluntarily purchase audit service to meet managerial and external funding needs. So here, what I mean by voluntary audit is that it's not mandated. And of course, it may come from demand from their lenders or other sources and such that they want to choose hire an audit firm to satisfy those demands. But voluntary here really means that they're not really mandated by a regulator. Okay. For example, private firms may engage independent accountants to attest to the company financial statement to access financing. Because oftentimes they would need to have audited financial statements if they want to, start a new banking relationship, for example. And here in our setting, the main source of financing is debt financing, which is something that we focus on. Very few firms go public during the sample period, so therefore we don't really focus on equity financing. So our data source comes from the Red Shield company, which is associated with the State Administration for Industry and Commerce in China. And the audit firm information comes from the Ministry of Finance in China. So we're going to differentiate two types of audit firms, Big 10 and non-Big 10. So the Big 10 consists of the traditional Big 4 audit firms that we all know. And in addition to 6 large audit firms, that are domestic in China. So our model, as mentioned, is a dynamic model. So starting from the client's choices, so we're going to differentiate between clients and audit firms. So from the client's perspective, a client chooses to take an audit and raise new debt based on their effects on both the client's current period utility and expected discounted future utility. So when we say utility, it's really, is from client's perspective, the value of choosing these options, which means an audit or debt. So more specifically, in each period, the client simultaneously choose an audit firm or no audit from a set of options. So where 0 would indicate no audit, whereas when J is not 0 would indicate the identity of audit firms selected to conduct the audit. We also allow clients to choose to raise new debt, which is also an indicator variable, which equals 0 if there's no increase in debt, and 1 when there is an increase in debt. So here in our data, so a caveat of our data is that we don't really directly observe debt raising. So we're going to use the change in the liability reported by the client. As some of you may know, the information provided by private firms is quite limited, but also at the same time is a good thing because it means that a lot of times the decision making for private firm is relatively easier to capture than public firms, which are far more complicated. All right, so again, the decision consists of 2 pieces: the audit firm decision to choose among set of options, and then raise debt or not. So with that, deliberately simplify these decisions so that they're easy to capture, and hopefully we capture some first order effects. So the state variable, which is a common terminology used by research in dynamic models, which basically means determinants. So we observe a set of client characteristics such as their size, loss, and whether they have negative equity. So a negative equity really is, in the context of research in private firms, captures leverage because some papers document that the decision process of clients with negative equity are different from the decision process of firms with positive equity. So firms with negative equity are really levered, and that's something that's not uncommon for private firms. And we also captures the client's previous period audit choices. Again, no audit, Big 10 or non-Big 10. Okay, so Big 10 again consists of the Big 4 audit firms that we all know and another 6 large audit firms in China. the state variable is not observed by the econometrician or us, but by the client are denoted by epsilon, which follows type 1 extreme value distribution. So this is common assumption in dynamic discrete choice models, and these assumptions would lead to a logic model, so which is something we often a model specification we often use for explaining discrete choices. All right, so here is the main setup for the demand for audit services, and so there are a ton of notations. So I'll focus on a few. So what really matters are basically 4 pieces. The first piece is so-called net audit service value. So whereas QJ basically captures the quality of audit services offered by J. As I alluded to earlier, so we're not going to use a proxy for audit quality as most papers commonly do. So we are going to estimate QJ from our structural model. The way we're going to estimate it is based on the profit maximization problem of the audit firm, which I will specify later on. But it's important to remember that QJ is it will be estimated, and it's going to vary based on client characteristics as well as audit firm identity. So basically, different clients might receive different audit quality from the same audit firm. And for the same client, different audit firm might offer different audit quality. And then we are going to estimate a coefficient on audit fees, which is also very common from in the structural IO industrial organization literature, which basically captures price sensitivity. And another element we capture is matching with Big Ten. So this captures, in addition to audit quality and audit fees, some clients may like the Big Ten audit firm more than others. So we allow this matching preferences to vary based on client characteristics. So in structural, in marketing research, structural marketing research, so this kind of preferences is called horizontal product differentiation. So basically means that for the same product quality and price, some consumers may prefer the product more than others for idiosyncratic reasons. In our case, that might also be true for audit firm preferences. Maybe large firms prefer Big Ten more because of its expertise in auditing more complicated financial statements, whereas the same preference does not apply to smaller firms. And we allow for such differences of preferences across clients for Big Ten. And similarly, we allow for difference in preferences for matching with non-Big Ten. And all of these preferences are relative to matching, relative to choosing no audit, which is the baseline audit. We also allow for differential utility from increasing debt relative to not increasing debt. Now, again, client characteristics would affect their incentive to increase debt. And in addition, we allow for the effect of having an audit in the past on increasing debt. So this you can think of as capturing in reduced form the signaling effect of choosing an audit. Basically, by choosing an audit in the current period is going to affect the probability of or the client's ability to increase debt going forward. We also allow for the audit quality to affect the probability of increasing debt. For example, if delta is negative, which means higher audit quality would reduce the probability of the utility from increasing debt. So then you would basically capture this disciplinary effect where higher audit quality reduces the utility from increasing debt. So other things equal, the client is less likely to increase debt. And this could be the case if managers have empire building incentives, so higher audit quality can constrain their incentive to increase the company size by raising debt. And if delta is positive, then the opposite interpretation would be true. So then higher audit quality would facilitate debt raising. For example, it could mean that higher audit quality increases the quality of financial statements, which reduces information asymmetry, in turn allows for more capital raising. So because the client is based on dynamic problem, so the client maximizes the sum of discounted future utility as follows. So the first equation is called a choice specific value function, which is basically the value of choosing audit firm J, where J could also include choosing no audit firms, and that choice is L, given the set of state variables, which is captured S, or determinants, and given the set of audit fee and quality offer. So this choice specific value function excludes the error terms. So I just write it excluding the error terms plus the expected future utility. So it's basically the current payoff from choosing audit firm J, and that choice is L, plus the expected future payoff given the current choices. So a dynamic model is necessary when the current choices affect the client's future payoffs. So basically, depending on which audit firm and the debt choices the client makes today, if the future payoffs are different, then we have a dynamic model. If the future is irrelevant for the client, then we don't really need to have one. In the context of the audit firm, so it's not difficult to imagine that future is relevant, because if I choose a Big 10 audit firm today, then the chances are, at least we observe in the data, the client is more likely to choose Big 10 again. So the current choice does have an implication for the future. And this choice specific value function can really simplify the notation, because in the end, what a client needs to think about when choosing the audit firm and debt choices is just to choose whatever produces the highest discounted future utility. And then here I'm adding back the error term. Right. And so this kind of summarizes the audit firm side. So at this point, so the audit firm side is, in addition, except for the dynamics, everything else is standard. So without the dynamic, basically, if we set the beta discount factor to 0, then what we essentially have is a multinomial logic model. So which is something that prior research also look into. For example, if some of you may know Gerakos and Severson, so 2015 JAR paper. So they use a logic approach, but a dynamic model. So this is quite similar to what they're doing. Even though we have fewer client characteristics because of the data limitation and because of the relative simple structure or financial statement structure of private firms. So on the supply side, so this is from the audit firm's perspective. So this is something like we newly added to the literature on private firm audits. So let's use pi k to denote the profit that audit firm K receives when client I chooses to pursue an audit and select audit firm J. Okay, so J and K could be different audit firms. So if the audit firm K is chosen by the client, so which means K is equal to J, so then the audit firm would get an audit fee, PK, minus the cost of audit, which we assume it takes a quadratic form of the quality being offered. So basically, the higher quality being offered means more costly to produce. The auditor's specific parameter CK influences the marginal cost of offering QK. So we are going to allow the C to vary between the Big 10 and non-Big 10 audit firms, which is something that will be really interesting to estimate. So, is it the case that Big 10 produce audit with lower cost, marginal cost, or higher? So the audit firm expected profits equals the following. So here they have expected profits because we assume they make offers of fee quality to clients first, and client would choose among different fee and quality offers. So we don't actually observe the actual bargaining process between the audit firm and clients. So we're making this assumption for simplicity. But also, is in a way also realistic because, there is an offer being given to the client. So we use the vector P to denote a vector of audit fees offered by audit firm 1 to J. So essentially, because we only have two type of audit firms, then we only have two different offers from these audit firm Big Ten and Big Ten offers. So we don't really have the capability of modeling more heterogeneity than just Big Ten and non-Big Ten differences. But again, a Q is also a vector of audit services quality offered by audit from 1 to J. So here, I think there is a typo. So it should not be audit service value. So it's just, the quality of audits. So later on, we will convert it to monetary units. So there we will have a value interpretation. And again, S is the set of state variables. Okay. So here, the D is basically the probability of K being chosen. So essentially, the expected profits, despite the notation, is quite straightforward. It's just the probability of being chosen by the client multiplied by the profits conditional on being chosen. And the profit structure is also straightforward because we focus on audit only. So it's just the audit fee the audit firm receives minus the cost of producing audit, which we assume increases with the quality being offered to the client. So higher quality, again, is more costly to produce. So the audit firm has a dynamic problem. So it would maximize the sum of expected discounted future profits, which we denote by WK, by simultaneously choose their audit fee PK and audit quality QK offers, given the pairs of audit fees and the value of audit services chosen by competing audit firms. So the Bellman equation, which is known by dynamic models. So it's basically by choosing the pair PK and QK to maximize the sum of discounted future payoff. So now, basically, this is the nutshell of the model. So, I will spare with you the details of how the models are solved, the model is solved, and directly jump to estimation. So the way to estimate these models is to adapt the conditional choice probability approach, which is developed by Hosen Miller, 1993. So the idea of the CCP approach, of conditional choice probability approach, is basically to exploit the one-to-one mapping between the conditional choice probabilities and the value functions. So what are value functions again? So the value functions are basically the B's, because it had a really complicated structure, which would make it very difficult to estimate. But fortunately, Hosen Miller basically demonstrated that there is a one-to-one mapping between the P, so between the V's, the value of choosing audit firm J and raising that decision L, between the VJL and the probability of client choosing audit firm J and making that decision L. So there is a one-to-one mapping between the value of making a certain choice and the probability of making that choice. So which is intuitive because, if the value of making certain choice is greater, then the probability of, making that choice would also be greater, as we will see in the data. So they exploit this kind of one-to-one mapping between the probabilities of choosing certain choices and the value functions, and show that we can really simplify the estimation of dynamic models, in particular dynamic discrete choice models. So without this kind of approach, in our setting, estimation can easily take thousands of days, and this is known as the curse of dimensionality. So one downside of a dynamic model is that if we really have to think about the first order determinants, we can't really just throw in control variables that we do for reduced form research. We have to really think about what really determines economic agents' choices, and that we can put into the model. Otherwise, the estimation would explode because you would just make it very costly. It would take very long to converge. But one thing that about the Hosen Miller is that they only deal with dynamic demand, whereas in our setting we also have the dynamic supply of audit services, because audit firms need to make their optimal decisions regarding the audit fee and quality choices. So we have to extend it somehow to accommodate dynamic supply. So our paper's appendix, we'll discuss in details, and after we post the paper on SSRN, so then everyone can see how we do that. But the nutshell is to exploit the first order conditions of the audit firm's maximization problems. What I mean by that is basically that from the audit firm's problem, we know the audit fees and quality the audit firm would choose, and from there we can basically put it into the client's demand problem and then solve for everything in one step. So with this extended approach, we can estimate the model by maximizing the likelihood function, as we do for any kind of logic models, right? So if we plug in something in data, so for the logic model, so it's estimating the model using maximum likelihood. So one last thing to note is that only relative effects on choices are identified from the data. So we have to choose a benchmark. So in this case, we choose no audit and no new debt as a baseline choice. All right, so what do we find? So several kind of exciting results, but also some of the results are pretty intuitive, some are less intuitive. So the first one to notice, given that we have a dynamic problem and we look at audit firms' supply of audit services, the one obvious question is what are the fees and quality choices they make? So first thing to notice is in this graph is where the horizontal axis is the Q, so the audit quality, and then the vertical axis is P, audit fees, and again, all the audit fees are expressed as a percentage points of clients' total assets. All right, for example, like 0.5 would means that 0.5% of the client's total assets. So here we scale up by total assets just to remove heterogeneity between between different clients, right? So that all of these numbers are more comparable. Otherwise, we have a problem, with client side. So again, there is a clear separation in product space between the Big 10 and non-Big 10. So Big 10 offers higher quality, which is denoted by the red triangles. So the quality space is higher, but also the audit fees are greater. Whereas non-Big 10, which is denoted by the blue dots, blue round dots. So these represents non-Big 10 audit fees and quality offers. So they offer lower quality, but also charge lower fees. So another thing to notice is that if you look at all of these points are like on the vertical looks like a vertical line. So this is because quality differentiation is minimal. Like by quality differentiation, I mean that quality differentiation within an audit firm type is very minimal. So for example, if you look at the non-Big 10 audit quality, so it's around 0.4. Whereas, for Big 10 audit quality, it's around like, 2.3. So there's very minimal differentiation. So this is not something we were imposed on the data. So it's, in the data, it could be the case that, all the audit firm offer very different quality to the client, but that's not what we observe. Whereas audit fee, on the other hand, has much larger variation. So audit fees, can range from 0.5% of clients' total assets to 0.8% of clients' total assets. That's something we observed in the data. We're able to estimate from the data. All right. So in terms of the audit firm's profits, and so here, we don't actually have the profit data, but we are able to estimate the marginal cost of producing the marginal cost parameter of producing an audit, and we also observe audit fees as well as the estimated quality of audit services. So then we are able to compute the audit cost. So you can see that here the Big 10 audits are more costly. So this is mostly because of its higher audit quality. So we actually observe that the marginal cost parameter of Big 10 is smaller. All right. So then so another thing to note is that despite the higher audit fees charged by Big 10 audit firms, just going back to the previous slide, you can see that audit fees of Big 10 audit firms are higher than non-Big 10, which is perhaps not surprising to many of you. So despite the higher audit fees, Big 10 audits are less profitable. This is because of its higher audit cost. All right. So now from the client standpoint, so we know that there is a clear fee and quality differentiation. So the question is, how do audit clients perceive the fee and quality? So the way to do it is by scale Q by theta. So where theta is the coefficient before the audit fees in the client's utility function. So you can see that there is clear differentiation between Big Ten and non-Big Ten values. So the Big Ten audits offer higher net value than non-Big Ten, which basically offers around like a zero audit value. So again, so this is the net value. So it's basically the quality being offered to the clients relative to the audit fees. So basically for non-Big Ten on average, it appears as if that the value of the audit service itself kind of is canceled out by the fees paid to the audit firm, right? Whereas Big Ten actually offers positive value. But now we also compute the total value of audit services. What this captures is basically the value of audit services that also account for clients' preferences. If we may recall, what our model captures is basically not only the so-called the fee and quality trade-off, we also incorporate clients' preferences, which I earlier mentioned referred to as horizontal product differentiation. Some clients may like Big Ten audits more than others. So once we account for this total value of audit services, including clients' preferences, now the total value of audit service becomes negative. So this is not surprising because only 27% of our sample firms actually choose an audit. So there must be something that's not desirable by the client. But what we show here is basically, that undesirability is unlikely to come from the quality of audit services itself. Maybe it represents some sort of agency concerns that people don't really want to hire an audit or budget constraint because it's not really their, hire an audit firm it will distract firms away from their main business. Another thing to notice is that repeated audits add more value. So if we look at the difference between the new audit and the repeated audit, you can see that the value of repeated audit becomes is less negative than the value of new audit. So next, we look at the client's demand for increasing debt. The first thing is to notice is this delta coefficient. So remember, delta is the coefficient before audit quality. So it's a positive delta means that higher audit quality increases the utility of increasing debt, whereas a negative delta means a lower utility of a higher audit quality lowers the utility of issuing debt, increasing debt. So here, consistent with the so-called disciplinary effect of audit, higher audit quality reduces the utility of increasing debt, which is captured by a negative coefficient delta. But also consistent with the so-called signaling effect, hiring an audit firm in the prior year increases the utility of increasing debt. All right. And so the joint effect is that the signaling effect seems to dominate. Basically, the coefficients of the sum of the coefficients of news and deltas, basically they are positive. They are positive. So again, going back to this new the signaling effect coefficient, the first one captures the effect of hiring a Big Ten audit firm. The second one captures the effect of having a non-Big Ten audit firm. So the signaling effect is stronger for hiring a Big Ten audit firms, which is also somewhat consistent with intuition. So next we performed a couple of counterfactual analysis to demonstrate the effect of audit, the effect of audit and the effect on audit and debt choices. So in the counterfactual analysis you see on the slide, we basically want to have a sense of clients' forward-looking incentives. So in here, we basically change client audit and debt probabilities by setting the discount factors to 0. So then we basically say that, let's assume that the client is fully myopic and, the client does not care about the future at all. So how would their audit firm choice and that choice be different? So it turns out that myopic clients are less likely to choose an audit. So we see a decrease in the probability of clients choosing Big Ten and non-Big Ten, whereas which are captured in the third and the second and third columns. So these results are consistent with audits offering long-term benefits. And so as soon as we set the discount factor to 0, so then clients don't really internalize or don't really care about the problem and the long-term benefits, the benefits from choosing the audit on their future payoff. So once that's the future benefits are gone, so they're less likely to choose an audit, which is intuitive. We don't really observe any economically significant change in the probability of increasing debt on average. So this basically means that the effect of the future payoffs are not that important for raising debt. Perhaps because firms don't really raise that all the time, so they raise that once in a while. So next, we considered this audit mandate. Some jurisdictions are thinking about expanding the audit mandates to cover more firms. So we would therefore we consider the value of audit mandate. So the way we conducted contractual analysis is that we first remove the stick-only effect of an audit because it's everyone everyone receives an audit because of a mandate, then there's no way for the high-tech firm to signal its type through choosing the audit firm because now everyone chooses the audit firm. So then we have to remove the signaling effect of an audit. Then after this effect is removed, basically, then we simulate new audit fees and audit quality offers by all audit firms. And then we simulate the client's optimal choices given new offers. Once we have the new client's optimal choices, then we re-simulate all the fees and quality offers, and then client's optimal choices given these updated audit fee and quality offers. We iterate the second and third steps until convergence. So what do we find? So the first finding is that firms' tendency to increase debt decreases. So this result is very straightforward because we remove the signaling effect. And recall that the signaling effect increases clients' tendency to increase debt. All right. So once we remove the signaling effect, which removes the benefit of the increasing debt, now the client's tendency to increase debt would decrease. So the next result is that there is a big change in the Big Ten market share. All right. So which increases from 21% to 84%. All right. So you may think this is a huge effect, but if you think about the number of firms being impacted by the mandatory audit, so basically 27% of the firms choose an audit in the voluntary regime, so which leaves 63% of firms, actually 73% of the firms, basically not choosing an audit and open to be grabbed by the Big Ten and non-Big Ten audit firms. So that this is a very drastic change in the market structure that we're simulating. So it's not surprising there will be a very dramatic effect on the audit firm industrial structure. So in terms of why we see this result, so we also look into audit fee and quality offers by the clients. So here the capital Q means the actual audit quality offer divided by theta, so which is the coefficient on client's audit fee. This is just so that we convert everything to dollar terms for the clients. So the Big Ten market share increases because the audit quality on average changes very little on average. So comparing the voluntary regime with the mandatory regime, so for the non-Big Ten audit firms, the audit quality is around 0.3 for non-Big Ten, and for Big Ten is around 1. Whereas for the audit fees, there seems to be more substantial changes. So Big Ten fees decrease, whereas non-Big Ten fees increase. So why does that happen? So this is because the Big Ten, the Big Ten has a cost advantage. I didn't really have time to show you the marginal cost parameters. The Big Ten has a lower marginal cost parameter. So in terms of, the competition, is with non-Big Ten, if it really wants to compete with non-Big Ten, then it's going to win because now the client has to choose between Big Ten and non-Big Ten, right? Whereas in the previous regime, the client can always choose, not to have an audit. So now because Big Ten directly compete with non-Big Ten, so it has a relatively cost advantage that allows it to win the competition more easily. So in equilibrium, we see that Big Ten gets more market share, due to its cost advantage. All right. So I think I'm ready to conclude. So basically, using voluntary audit decisions of Chinese private firms, we develop a dynamic model that considers both the client and audit firm forward-looking behavior. Clients decide on audits and that simultaneously weigh on the trade-off between the audit quality and the fees offered by Big Ten versus non-Big Ten audit firm in the oligopolistic audit market. Also need to mention that audit firms are also forward-looking and anticipate the effect of their fees and quality offers on the probability of being chosen, as well as their future net profits. So we find basically audits, particularly those conducted by the Big Ten audit firms, add value. Clients seeking to increase that face a dynamic trade-off when choosing audits, and voluntary audits increase the Big Ten market share, but reduce firms' tendency to increase that. So I just want to thank you everyone for listening. And if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know.
Thank you, thank you very much, dear Professor Frank, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation and excellent paper. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any question, you can open your mic and ask your question. Chen Zhang, you have a question? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Yes, there is a question about the economic significance of the result. The Professor Frank.
Yep. So where's the question?
Someone asked about the economic significance of the result.
Oh, the economic significance of the results. So in terms of there are many results in the paper. So in terms of the net value of audit services, I think that the results are the Big Ten audit firms. Let me just share the screen again. So I think that might be easier to. Yeah, it's a fair point. Right. So the mandatory audit, obviously, that's a pretty large effect, but we're also asking for a very, very large policy shift. So this is based on kind of counterfactual analysis. Whereas for the value, so go to this. So here the Big Ten, so the value is around like 0.1% of clients' total assets. So from a grand scheme of things perspective, it's not that large. But we're also talking about audits, right? So it's not the client's main business. So I feel like personally, the effect is pretty sizable. But obviously that's a subjective kind of characterization. Yeah.
Other question about Shahid Khan, you can ask.
Yeah, so just to understand, since I'm not so familiar, so the reason you picked Chinese market for this dynamic model, what were the main reasons for that?
That's a great point. So I think the main reason is just basically we have very detailed data. So at some point, so we were thinking about expanding it to US data, but I have a hard time, basically getting that data. So then we decide to just focus on one institutional environment, which is China, for which we have good data. So the method can be applied to any setting, really. And another thing, is for private firms in China, so that the audits are voluntary. So so we can't really use other settings where private firms also get audits, but then it's kind of more like a mandated. But mainly data availability, not so much for like another economic reasons.
Oh, thank you. So I was trying to understand the model. I know you emphasized that the audit and the debt, try to kind of relate the debt into it. So let's say if the um, firm is trying to signal to another firm, they're where they do the business with, and they want to signal that we are a high quality firm, and they're just doing it for other reasons than debt. Is that something you considered in the model? Is it part of the, like, I don't understand the structure modeling, so I'll really appreciate that structure model, like that dynamics, why you picked that sort of setting.
Yeah. So you're saying like, what happens if, basically, let me just share that again. If uh, you know, that decision is irrelevant. Okay, so let's go to the client utility. So the last piece of the utility function, so it basically captures client's incentive to increase that. And then here we have the delta term. So like, it's captured the effective audit quality on client's utility from increasing that, right? So when the client does not really want to change that, they're basically when L is zero, so the rest will capture client's incentive to choose certain audit quality and feed pairs or audit firms. And so it's really captured by, for example, this lambda term. So if the client had a Big 10 audit firm, how likely is it to hire Big 10 again? And you can interpret it as some sort of effort to signal quality. So that's that could be the interpretation. And one thing that one caveat of this approach is that it's still going to be you will rely on reviewed preferences, meaning that I see like some people are doing something that must mean that they like it somehow, but the reason why they like it is it's not directly specified. So to your question, for example, if clients wants to signal their type to some other stakeholders because let's say that those stakeholders care about audit quality, so then it's going to be captured by either the decision to hire an audit firm in the past, or captured by some their characteristics. For example, maybe large firms have this higher demand for higher audit quality, so then it's going to manifest in one of those coefficients. But it's as researchers we have to impose an interpretation, so it's not directly modeled. And another thing that this capture is kind of the quality estimates, right? So if on average clients we find that net value of audit services is positive, which means that at least from the client's perspective, they care. Even if they don't raise that, they care about having higher quality audit, and that's somewhat reassuring, but also indicates that there's some demand for audit services, at least from client standpoint, but we don't really explain the source of that demand. All right, so again, the only source of that demand will come from the client characteristics, and we can have interpretations about why that's the case, but we don't really have sort of a specific mechanism in mind, basically. Yeah.
Great. I think that was very helpful. Thank you. I just wanted one last thing was, I know you mentioned in the conclusion about the mandatory and the equilibrium sort of in effect. So I'll really appreciate if you can kind of clarify that point in more. So just wanted to hear that again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So let's see. So basically, what happens here with mandatory audit is that for your information, there's 27% of firms choosing an audit voluntarily, right? So in the mandatory regime, so basically everyone has chosen an audit. So the Big 10 and non-Big 10 would have to compete for this, like a 73% of clients, right? So basically they need to have an audit firm. So then how does this competition work? And well, basically is a, kind of two firm competition, right? So they just need to, figure out, what are the client's preferences, and then, choose an audit fee and quality based on those client preferences. And ultimately what's going on is that the one with lower cost of producing an audit is more likely to win the market. All right, everything else equal, right? So there is, this preferences issue, like, some firms prefer Big Ten more than non-Big Ten, so that has to be accounted for. But, everything holding the client side constant, then the Big Ten is more likely to win the competition because the cost of producing audit is lower. And this is not an assumption. So this is something we estimate from our structural model. So from our parameter estimate, we know that Big Ten has lower cost producing audit. And when it's lower cost, then the audit fees is able to charge will be lower. So it's more likely to win the market share. But Big Ten doesn't win all the way because some clients prefer not Big Ten. So for whatever reason, that we also estimate those preferences, and so this joint two effect would lead to changes in the market share of Big Ten and not Big Ten. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on. I'm happy to explain more if you have like kind of more follow-up or specific questions. I'm not sure like I'm making sense to you.
Thank you so much. I will definitely follow up later if I have more questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want sort of if you don't mind sort of a dirty and early stage version of our draft, then you can send me an email. And then I'm happy to send a draft to you. We haven't really posted everything on SSRN because we're still rewriting everything and try to put the paper together. But yeah, I'm happy to send it to you. And if you have any question, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lee? Yeah. Lee, you have any questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Hi, Frank. May I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry if I kind of missed your information from the presentation. May I ask why you choose the sample from 2001 to 2008, if I remember correctly? And how did you get the data from Chinese private firms?
Oh, so it wasn't from 2001 to 2007. So that's Mike Menace's dissertation. So for our case, it's between 2013 to 2018. Yeah, so that's the oh, sorry, I have sorry, my computer is frozen. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right. So yeah, where was I? Yeah, so it's from 2013 to 2018, right? So that's the data, the sample period we have. Whereas like how it get the data, so that's a question for my co-author, and so like I really don't know how they get the data. So then all I know is that and also didn't ask, maybe I should have. So the data source is the Right Shield company, which is associated with the State Administration for Industry and Commerce. And then the audit frame information is from the Administrative Finance.
I see. So the most updated data should be available, right?
I don't think so. So we tried. I know, like the data we have is until 2018. So I don't know why. The post 2018 data is not available. But if you know sort of a way to get that data, that'll be great. So then we're happy to get that data. So the more data we have, the more information we would have actually. So
great, thanks for letting us know. And I'm really looking forward to your paper online.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, are there other questions, Osama?
Yes. Hi, Frank. Great presentation. And I apologize in advance because I'm not very familiar with structural models, but I'd like you to kind of walk me through how that works. And so when I was looking at how you model those preferences of matching, with big firms, Big Ten, non-Big Ten, my question was sort of give me the intuition of wouldn't that result in the results of the structural model mechanically mirroring what we observe in the unconditional descriptive statistics. For example, the descriptive that you gave that most private firms don't take an audit, like how you model those preferences, how do you lead it to not just mirror that?
Oh, that's an awesome point. Let me I'm glad you raised it. And then I'm gonna explain it from like what I, the way I think about the problem. You can tell me whether, that makes sense or not. And just feel free to tell me that, there are issues with that interpretation. So like in a nutshell, you're absolutely right. So it's based on reviewed preferences in the sense that, well, if in the data you see like, most firms don't really choose an audit, so then, that's going to manifest somewhere in the model, right? And the way it manifested, in this case is that the total value of audit services is very negative. So I think that part is a bit mechanical. So, but one thing, but it's not always the case because we have a dynamic structure. So to give you a couple of examples, the first one is, so the net value of audits, just go to here. For example, like, for Big 10 is actually positive, right? So so if you look at the quality of audit service itself, net of audit fees, the Big 10 offer a higher value of audit service. So that's not something that we would be able to easily infer from the data, right? So because in the data, so very few firms choose Big 10, but it is kind of somewhat reflected in the total value, so that's negative. So which is consistent with very few firms not liking Big 10. So in terms of the preferences, that's, some people just inherently don't like Big 10. So that is quite mechanical. But, in terms of the quality of audit services and all that, so that's have to do with, the audit firm's incentive as well. So that's far less obvious. And going, back to the intuition, like, the relationship in the data, would almost mechanically map into the model. So that's what I thought as well. But, one thing we found, quite interesting, which I did not have time to discuss, is that, for example, like the coefficient on size is actually negative. So which means that, for the current period utility, like, larger firms are less likely to get higher utility from Big 10. But in the data, it's actually the opposite. Like larger firms are more likely to choose Big 10. So the reason it's here is that, the current period of payoff from choosing a Big 10 the first time is actually lower, but then there is a greater future payoff. So then the joint effect of the two would predict, larger size more likely to choose Big 10. So like, there are a lot of nuances in the model that does sometimes it does map into the data, sometimes it does not map into the data. So that's kind of, two things: coefficient on size and the net value of audit services. That will be sort of where I find the results kind of more surprising.
Okay, thank you so much. That was clear.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. But again, like I'm happy to send my draft, like, anyone is interested, and then, happy to talk more, because I feel like, this is, something that I'm still learning. So, I have one paper using the same approach, and I'm still trying to figure out, like, learn more about, the sort of where things can be improved further. This is definitely not something that's, like a very well established in the literature. I'm still trying to establish it, and so like learn from the process.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Yeah.
Question about what you suggest for future research, Professor Frank.
Oh, so what did I suggest for future research? So that's also a very exciting question. Something I was thinking about even last night. So I feel like, one thing is currently I think, going back to the earlier two questions, right? So especially the question from, I'm sorry, like, is it Osama? So like, Osama. So that's a great question. So far we rely on reviewed preferences. Ideally, if we know more about these firms, and it's particularly private firms, or maybe this is more of a research question related to public firms, it's basically what is the inherent, like, friction that leads to the demand for audit. So is it, for example, like, some sort of adverse selection problem, in which an audit can solve? So that it being specific about mechanism would be really interesting. So far what we rely on is reviewed preferences. We know that, you know, for example, large firms like Big 10, I mean, that's all good and fine, but why? Right. So then I think that's kind of where you know, I think you know, we can take this kind of approach forward. But it's not an easy problem because of the dynamics. And so I think that's the thing. And also in terms of like, you know, the general consumer of this kind of research, I would say that, you know, it takes a lot of efforts to get everything into one place. And so I think that's also something that, you know, if the more people work on it, so then the more likely that we, you know, the general audience can understand what's going on.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Thank you very much, dear Professor Frank Cho, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you, everyone joining us today, and thank you very much for taking the time to present it to us, dear Professor Frank. It has been appreciated. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone's comments. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope
have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, and I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
Yeah, definitely. That's on my agenda. Thanks.
Yeah.